Welcome, everyone. This is the first of a three-part series. So what are you doing for the next two Wednesdays, today and the next two Wednesdays? I hope you're here with us with Heather Turner. She is going to be talking about WordPress for 3 weeks. Each of these webinars is an hour and a half. Today is WordPress 101. Before we get started, and I don't want to take any time away from Heather, but before we get started, I really need to tell you a little bit about SCORE. So I'll just briefly explain. If you don't know what SCORE is a nationwide nonprofit organization, and we're an independent resource partner of the Small Business Administration. We provide free, confidential business mentoring and business educational services. We have weekly webinars and workshops. There are over 300 chapters nationwide with 10,000 volunteers who are here to help you. So please think about applying for a SCORE mentor. Our chapter has nearly 90 volunteers, and we service Manatee and Sarasota counties in Florida. But as Heather and I were saying, we actually have clients all over the country. So if you, depending on, doesn't matter where you are, if you would like to apply for a SCORE mentor, that's easy to do. Our chapter was recently recognized as a district chapter of the year. So when should you apply for a mentor? Well, I have to tell you, pretty much any time in your whole business cycle. You know, you just woke up this morning, you think you have a good idea and you like to kick it around a little bit. We love kicking ideas around. So why don't you contact us and see if we think it's as good an idea as you do, or you've started up and opened a business and realized, oh my goodness, this marketing is a lot harder than I thought, or this financial stuff is, Greek to me. Well, that's the time to apply for a mentor. Or you're in business and you realize that your business is stagnated. Why don't you contact us and we'll look and see if we can give you some ideas. Or lastly, you're selling or closing your business, or actually, if you are buying a business, contact us. We'll help you so that you don't leave money on the table. How do you get a mentor? Well, it's pretty easy. You go to score.org/Minnesota. That is our chapter's page. And there's a big old button that says request a mentor. You fill in a little bit of information, primarily your zip code, but also what kind of help are you looking for? We get some interesting results to that question, actually, but fill it in and you will be within a few days assigned a mentor. You can also choose your own mentor. You can look through the mentor profiles and identify a mentor that you would like to have and connect with them. You can also on our website look at other workshops. If you haven't signed up for the other two series in this series, that would be where you could go to do it. You'll also get a link, of course, not only to this recording of this, as well as the slides that Heather is going to be presenting today, but there'll be a link to enable you to sign up for the two other in the series. Lastly, I'd like to thank our sponsors, recognize our sponsors. You'll see that many of them are financial institutions. If you go into a financial institution with a SCORE mentor, they're going to listen to you a lot more than they will if you walk in with a box of receipts and you say, I think I'm making money. Maybe could you lend me a little bit more? Trust me, they enjoy when you come in with a mentor, and we thank our community partners. So that is all I want to talk about. I'm going to stop sharing so that Heather can start sharing her screen. She is a SCORE mentor and has used a SCORE mentor, as you can see on the screen. So let me let you take it away. It's yours, Heather.
Thank you very much, Diane. So I was going to say good morning, everybody. I guess it's still technically morning in some zip codes and some time zones. So just to give you a little bit of a heads up about this is all PowerPoint for this particular session. The next session will be half PowerPoint and half live. Hopefully the live internet will cooperate. And then version 3 or session 3 will be all online. Again, hopefully the internet can cooperate with us at that point. The reason I'm starting about with this is because there is a lot to go over that people diving into WordPress don't know, don't consider. A lot of people are just starting out with their websites, let alone WordPress. And I think it's important to start with the basics because I know a lot of people that have gotten into starting a WordPress site and they don't really know what they're doing or where they should be going or what kind of information they should have in advance. Just a kind of a history about how I got involved with WordPress. As Diane had mentioned, and on the slide, I spent 20 years in the restaurant business. And then about 20 years ago, I started my own business doing website design and graphic design. And way back then, I don't think WordPress was even around then. We were doing good old hand-coded HTML websites and using Dreamweaver, which was one of the very few programs out there for web design. And I had a long-term client that every few years we would redo his website completely, update it. He wanted to change things around. And people started using mobile phones and the internet on mobile phones. And mobile website design became more and more important. And so he wanted to switch his website over from HTML to WordPress. And at that time, I didn't really want anything to do with WordPress, didn't want to learn it, didn't want to know anything about it. And so I actually went out and found a developer who I thought was going to work after many trials and errors of finding people and interviewing them. And everything was going very well at first. And then 6 months later, my long-term client called me up, and he's also a very good friend of mine now, and said, this isn't working. This guy is not doing what he said. He's way over budget, way over time. And the website that he's building on WordPress is not mobile friendly as he promised me. And he said, fix it, which meant, oh, what fun. I need to learn WordPress. So I did. So I'm coming at WordPress from kind of the layman's version and also want to go over many of the things that I learned because they're important that I want to pass on to you as I learned more about this and learned more myself about web design. So this is very basic, but it is hopefully going to educate you a little bit on some of the things that you may not know. Okay. And if you have questions, please ask them in the chat box. I'm happy to try to address them as we go through this. Okay, so today we're going to be covering domain names. As I said, we're kind of starting out from scratch with this. We're going to be talking about hosting service. We're going to be talking about WordPress themes and plugins. And believe it or not, there's a lot of information that goes along with all of those. Okay. First, I want to start out with something, if you're just diving into WordPress, is there's two different options for WordPress. There's WordPress.com and WordPress.org. The basis of this is actually the same thing. The major differences, though, is one is what's called self-hosted, which means that you don't have to pay separately for a hosting service. You don't have to update things, but it does give you it gives you less options to use, but it's also a bit more worry-free. The other version of that is something that you have to install. So it's actually a program, WordPress, the WordPress program, that has to be installed on a hosting service. It has to be connected to a domain name, and it has to be updated. Okay, so WordPress, there's 3 different things that will need to be updated. There's a theme, and the theme is also kind of known as a template. There's plugins need to be updated, and there's the WordPress version. And we'll talk about all of those a little bit more in depth. Okay. The one thing that I always encourage people to do, and this is not necessarily directly related to WordPress, but is definitely related to your business, is I always encourage any business that has a website to please make sure that they install Google Analytics. Okay. Google Analytics is completely free, but it's really going to help your business because it's going to tell you who's coming to your website, not specifically, like I can't know that Diane is coming to visit my website specifically, but it's going to tell me where people are coming from. So for example, if Minnesota Score linked to your website for whatever reason, it would actually tell you that that's where your traffic is coming from. It will tell you what pages are being read and clicked on. It will tell you what links are being clicked on, and it will tell you the amount of traffic that you're getting on a daily basis. Now, this information is integral from a marketing perspective because you could be getting a ton of traffic to your website as a business owner, whether you're selling a product or selling a service. And you may not be getting sales. People may not be calling you. But what you might not know is people might come to your website. They might click from the home page to your products or services page. They might spend 30 seconds and then they would leave. That's what's known as a bounce. And unless you have those analytics installed on your website, you're not going to know that. You're not going to know that, hey, your homepage is working great, but your products or services page is not sticky enough to hold people's attention. So the analytics, again, it's free, is really going to help you. Okay. If you go, and there's some links that will be shared in a handout after, there are free courses that you can take. At least get the basic one done, because that will really, really help your business. I've talked to so many businesses that have Google Analytics installed, but they've never looked at the reports. So just because you install it, if you don't use it, it's not going to help you either. Okay. Now, the first step in websites is your domain name search. So that's the URL that's at the top of the page. So http widget.com, for example, is a URL, and that is your domain name. The first step, no matter which type of website that you're going to do, which platform you're going to use, whether you're using WordPress, whether you're using some of the do-it-yourself website platforms like Wix or Squarespace or Weebly, for example, there's dozens and more. Your first step is your domain name search. And that's important to do before you get started really with anything else. Okay. If you have not done a domain name search, or just out of curiosity, how many people that are on have registered a domain name, or they're still considering registering? So if you could put that in chat, that would be super helpful. Registered. Okay, good. Okay, terrific. So you've
We
got
have a few hands up. If you have a
yep,
question,
yep,
please put it in the chat. Sorry.
absolutely. Okay, so it's good that you have registered these. If you haven't registered these yet, some of the things to consider are, has this domain name been registered before? So for example, you might go to GoDaddy, or you might go to Namecheap, which is, there's a lot of domain registrars out there. Has anybody else used this in the past? And this is important to research. Even if you have registered your domain name for the first time, there's a great website out there called the Internet Archive. What I would like you to do before you get started building your website and putting that name out there is to go to the Internet Archive. There's going to be some tabs up at the top that'll say meta search. You want the very, very last one that says web search, and see if that domain name has been used before. The reason being is you could have a domain name that had been in use for 12 years, for example, and then the business went out of business and there hasn't been anything sitting on that domain name for another 5 years or 2 years or even 10 years until you re-registered it. Okay, so you never actually buy a domain name forever. You're basically kind of renting it on the internet. That domain name could have been used before for another business. And the reason I say please research that is because that can affect your search engine optimization. Okay. If widgets.com, for example, had been registered 10 years ago, there's probably websites out there on the internet that are still linking to that domain. So if you have a completely different business, you need to track those down and fix that information. Okay. We'll talk some more about search engine optimization in another session too, but I wanted to start there because that's important. And Michael asks, hi, Michael, if you're the Michael I think about, it's good to hear from you again. Are there effective ways to opt our website out of Internet Archive's Wayback Machine? Michael, well, not really, and it doesn't always pick up the whole websites. It doesn't pick up all of the website information all the time, but it's a good way to just see what's been out there before. You can do competition research using that too, but you can send them a request to take it out, but there's not really any way to opt out now that I'm aware of. And I'm not really sure why you would want to, quite honestly. Hopefully that helped. Suresh, on that site you started, do you start with search with the metadata or the archived website? Archived website is usually the best one. You'll find out as you hit the keys, if nothing comes up, that's not the right selection choice. My apologies, I don't have it up in front of me, but of all of the choices, it's the very last one with a circle on it is the one that you want. Okay. All right. So GoDaddy, for example, is an example of a domain name registrar. And this is a question that I frequently get asked is, do you only register a .com, for example? Or if a .com is already registered, do you register the .net? Okay, and yes, Paula, I can certainly add that, and I'll make sure actually that it's included in the handout too. Okay, so to start with, if the .com is not taken, I would always register that one first. If you're a nonprofit, .org is usually the extension that you want to grab, but I would also grab the .com and the .net. Okay, if .net is the only one that's available, so widgets.net, for example, what's on .com? Is anything? Is it going to conflict with your business? If there's nothing there, could it potentially conflict with your business? So just be cautious of that. If you're ever going to register another domain extension, there's so many, and these are what these are called, like .studio, .city, .capital, for example. Those are all known as domain name extensions. Coca-Cola Studio, for example, when you tell people your domain name and say, hey, look us up at Coca-Cola, they're going to put in coca-cola.com. So if those .coms and those .nets are already taken, you might want to consider a different domain name. Okay, just because those really aren't going to help you and you're going to have a hard time competing with them search engine optimization wise. I hope that made sense to everybody. Okay, so make sure you own it. And the reason I say that is if you have a friend helping you with this, or maybe you've said, oh, I don't want to deal with this, it's too much work, and you go to somebody to help. Maybe it's paid, maybe it's free, maybe it's a college intern, for example, and they register it for you. Or you're going to use a website developer because you started out doing this yourself and then realized, I don't necessarily want to do this. I'm going to go pay a professional to do this. Please make sure that you own your domain name. If you've already had it registered, please make sure that you have access to this account. And if there's anybody else that has access to the account, why? Okay. If you're using a website developer for this, they should not own this. Okay. And honestly, the only time they need access to your domain name, so GoDaddy or Network Solutions or One-on-One or whoever the domain name registrar that you're using, they only need access to this for literally about 5 minutes. And if you're going to give them access, change your password afterwards. Okay. And it's not just to try to scare people, only to make sure that people are aware of the fact that if you have someone else register your domain name, what happens if their credit card expires and they're not keeping up on it? You could, and I could give you hundreds of stories of businesses that have had other people register their domain names for them, their sisters, their partners, a website developer, the guy down the road that knows about websites, for example, and they're just trying to get help out. And that person passes on, or they change their email address, or their credit card expires. And that business has spent lots of money and lots of time promoting that domain name for their business. And somebody else snatches it up from another country and they won't give them back. They'll demand lots and lots of money, but it's very, very rare to get those back. Make sure you own it. Make sure you can access it, and pay attention to those email reminders. When you get an email reminder, and I'll just use GoDaddy because that's one of the ones that a lot of people use. I'm not going to say yay or nay that it's a perfect web or domain registrar service, but just make sure that you pay attention to those emails. Your domain name renewal is coming up. I shouldn't have to ask. Don't click on the links in the email. Go right to GoDaddy.com and log in, but always pay attention to those. Okay. If you haven't registered a domain name for the first time, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of domain registrars out there. Okay. Make sure there's 24/7 support. Make sure there's email support and phone support. Okay. I've talked to a lot of businesses who have registered domain names through companies that only have email support, and they might have a problem. They get locked out of their account. Their credit card needs to be renewed, for example, and it takes weeks, sometimes never. They've never been able to get hold of those registrars. So make sure that you can call them. The more options you have for contact, the better, quite honestly. Okay. Now, if you haven't registered a domain name or you're registering additional ones, for example, what is the real yearly cost? Most domain registrars have, like GoDaddy, for example, they'll say, register your domain name for 2 years and your first year is only $1.99. What is the long-term cost of that? It's usually about $20 per year. Okay. But make sure that you have that in your budgeting when you're doing your business plan, when you're doing accounting. Make sure that that $199 initial is going to go up to that yearly fee. Okay. Also check to see if there's fees for transferring. So for example, if you already have a website, I know somebody mentioned that they're having their site transferred from Wix to WordPress, for example. Some companies like Wix sometimes will charge a fee for transferring your domain name. So if you're registering this for the very first time, for example, make sure you have that information. I know there's a few companies out there that will charge you several $100s to transfer it. Most companies will not. Okay. Do they give you an SSL certificate? So that SSL certificate in Google, it used to be that little lock in your URL. They've actually changed it so it looks like a little half circle and half circle. That's the security lock. So you used to only see that on bank sites, on credit card companies, but now that actually ties into search engine optimization. So it's encouraged that if you do not have an SSL certificate on your website, that you get one. There are free ones. Many hosting services out there will actually give you them for free. And if you're registering a domain name through Network Solutions, for example, is email included with that? Or is there an additional monthly fee? Okay, not all domain registrars offer email services, but many of them do. Okay, does anybody have any questions about domain names? This is usually where I get a couple of questions about registering multiple ones and multiple names online. So just want to check to see if anybody has any comments about that before I go on. Okay, all right. You will get an email usually once a year from ICANN. This is the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. It is important that you fill this information out. And basically, it's just making sure that they have the correct information in there. Another good reason to do that is also to go in and make sure your phone number is up to date, that your current email address is up to date. You might have moved, for example. I know a lot of people register a domain name and they might use their personal address in the registration, for example, and they've moved and they need to update that information. So it's just a good kind of poke to make sure that that information gets updated for your own use. And again, check to see whether your credit card information is up to date and it's not going to expire for a while. Okay. The one thing that I would also caution is once you have registered a domain name, you are going to get snail mail. You'll probably get 4 to 5 of them per year. Your domain registrar will never ever send you anything in the mail. Those are all scams, and they use scare tactics. Oh, your domain name's expiring. Transfer it to us so you don't lose it. Don't do that. They'll never mail you. They will only email you, and they'll only call you generally if you request a call. Okay. Michael asked, does it make any sense to hop registrar to save money? Honestly, Michael, I've never heard of anybody doing that. The only reason I've ever seen people do that is they might register through one domain registrar like Network Solutions, for example, and then go to GoDaddy because registration per year is cheaper. Network Solutions is one of the oldest and the top ones, but I've never heard anybody using it like, paying off their credit card debt where they bounce from registrars to registrars. And, I'd also be cautious of doing that too, because it can screw up some other things. It can screw your search engine optimization up too. And if there's other settings in your domain registration, like it's connected to email, for example, where it's connected to e-commerce, sometimes that can mess things up. Okay. Question, is it convenient to buy the privacy feature when buying a domain? I'll give you my personal opinion on this. So if you're trying to completely hide who you are from a business perspective, yes. Realistically, though, if you're concerned because people are going to be emailing you, you're going to get snail mail anyway. If you have a business, whether it's a service business, an online business, or brick and mortar business, you're going to be putting your contact information. You're going to be putting probably where you are, or you're going to be putting a PO box. You're going to be putting, the phone number, the email, where you are, what state. That information is so easy to gather anyway. Even if people aren't just looking at your website, like they could go in New Hampshire, for example, they could go to the New Hampshire trade name registration and look you up as a business, and it'll give people the address. So is it worth it to spend that extra money? unless you're trying to hide everything from the world, I would always say not really. It's just kind of a waste of money. That is personally my own personal take on that, though. Okay. So Esther says, what do you mean by make sure you own it? So it means make sure that you're the one that has sole access to that account. So I'll use, sorry, Diane, but I can see you. So if Diane, for example, registered my business domain name for me, she might have put my name in the registration, but she's technically the registrant and she has access to the account. It just means that in terms of you own it, you have access to it. You know, I have seen website designers register domain names in their own names. I've seen friends register domain names in their own names. Okay. The registrar doesn't care whose name it is, even if you can prove that you own the business. Trying to get that out of them, if push came to shove, has never gone well. Okay. Let's see. Chris says, I've never seen this in 25 years. Is there a website just went on? It shows that administrative is perfect privacy and who is the registrar. Okay, so Chris, so I'm assuming that you're looking up a domain name. So if you're looking that up, you're going to get that in the reply, which means that it's privately registered. Okay. He buys it because it's a personal blog. So Chris, if you own it, yes, unless you paid for private registration, you should be the one as the administrator, owner, registrant. Okay. Michael says, okay, and Michael, so when you're not going to get an email directly from ICANN, you're going to get it from, like, if you registered with GoDaddy, for example, you're going to get the email from GoDaddy saying you need to make sure that your ICANN your ICANN information is updated. Does that help? Okay, so the other part of this is website hosting. So your domain name is the URL. Hosting is kind of like renting space on the internet, I guess is the best way to kind of describe it. It means that, you know, just like buying something online, it's not permanent. This is yearly or monthly. Okay. Some things to look for, just like when you're registering a domain name, when you're looking for a good hosting company, you want to make sure that they have as many ways to contact them as possible. Okay. And if you ever come across this that says 100% uptime, that's not true. Okay. There's never any website hosting platform out there that has 100% uptime. What that means is your website is going to be online 100% of the time. Even the best hosting services go down for very, very brief periods. They might be a couple minutes. Sometimes they might be a couple of hours. A good hosting company will shoot you an email, and you also might get notified like, hey, we went on your website, but your website's offline. Okay. And I would not opt out of ICANN because it's not spam or junk email. That information is important to make sure that you get that and make sure it's updated. Okay. A lot of people ask me what hosting platform I recommend. I personally have found SiteGround a very good hosting platform for WordPress. Your best bet is to do your research, because I mean, I could say SiteGround is great, and then you could talk to 20 other people that don't like SiteGround. You know, do your research, you know, find out and talk to the people online. Pick up the phone for GoDaddy, pick up the phone for SiteGround, pick up the phone for Dreamhouse. Talk to somebody on the phone. How hard is it to get a live person? Do they help you? Do they answer their questions? Is the information ready to be accessible at all points for you? You know, make sure that it's something that you feel comfortable using. If you buy something, for example, or you're paying for hosting for a month, for example, and you're having issues, you might want to consider transferring to something else, but do your research, talk to other business owners, and find out if they've had problems with them, or find out if they love them. The best way realistically to find out a good hosting service is just ask around and do your research and reviews online. Because again, I could say SiteGround's great, but 20 other people could not agree with me. Everything's a personal perspective piece in this one. Okay. There's two things to make sure of when you're looking at hosting. You're going to come across this when you're looking at hosting packages. Okay. One is going to say shared hosting. The other is going to say dedicated hosting. Dedicated hosting is always going to cost more. Okay. There's a reason for this. It means that that single server is just for you. Shared hosting means that your website, so your WordPress site, is also being shared with a bunch of other websites. Okay. This can have some downsides. It's definitely a lot cheaper. So if you're paying for price, well, you might want to start out with that, but you might want to migrate over to something called dedicated hosting. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One, shared hosting means that if you have 20 other websites that are all sharing that hosting space, and a couple of them are getting a lot of traffic, it could slow your site speed down. The other reason is if you have a website, for example, or a couple of websites that on that shared hosting, and perhaps one of them is a not safe for work website, let's try to put it politely like that, and maybe another one is a spam site, for example, that could potentially hurt your own search engine optimization rankings because it's considering being connected kind of by default. Okay. And there's a question in here: when working with WordPress.org, can your domain name end with .com? Yes, your domain name can end with whatever you want. So just because it's WordPress.org shouldn't mean that their domain name extension, that ending, can't be .com, .org, .net, .zip, whatever you would prefer. Okay. So when you go to look at like SiteGround, or you go look at Bluehost or HostGator or any of the hosting companies that are out there, you're going to come across a link at the top that always says packages. When you click on packages, you're going to see it'll actually tell you shared hosting or dedicated hosting. Okay, so it'll actually give you the options. It'll give you how much space there is. It's going to give you a lot of other additional information in there. So it'll tell you right up front. Okay. Now, questions to ask when you're looking for hosting services. Are there automatic backups? Okay. WordPress is stored online. All of those files that you create in WordPress are stored on the internet. And if there's an issue with your website and something happens to it, for example, you need to make sure that there are backups online. There are ways to make sure that you have manual backups that you can do. But a question to ask is, does the hosting company do automatic backups? Is it daily? Is it once a week? If it's more than once a week, I would look for somebody else. Okay. And the other question is, will they help you restore your site? So if something happens to your website, just because the hosting service has an automatic backup of it, are they going to help you fix it, or are they going to kind of leave you on your own to talk to a tech support person and have you fix it? Okay. And yes, Namecheap is actually one of the established companies out there for hosting and domain name registration. So I've never used them personally myself. I haven't heard anything bad about them, if that helps. Okay. Well, so think of it this way, and I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but I'll talk about this now because I think this is really important. Is I had mentioned at the beginning, when you dive into WordPress, you're going to need to make sure that your themes are updated on a fairly regular basis. You're going to need to make sure your plugins are updated on a fairly regular basis, and the WordPress version. All of those three things can cause your website to go offline. And I think people getting into WordPress for the first time, and this is not to scare people, to make people aware of this, is if you do not have a website backup and you update your WordPress theme, for example, your website breaks. Not always, but it can happen sometimes. So if you don't have a backup of that, how are you going to restore it? It's not like you have a downloaded Word document where you can just re-upload everything again. Okay. Chris says, I've WordPress for one of mine, and Elementor has been horrible with text out. My site is broken and I can't figure it out at all. And Chris, this is really where Elementor is kind of a page builder. We'll talk about that later too. And I'm sorry you've been having problems with tech help. Maybe I can try to help offline at another point. Michael says, is it necessary to use a plug-in backup tool if SiteGround does automated backups? That's really up to you. I'm always like, from the perspective of like my own personal files, and I look at my website like this too. Even though I have all of my files backed up on an external hard drive, I also have them backed up in like 4 other different places. So even though the hosting company that I use does automatic backups, I use a plugin as well to do my own backups, and then I store them in a hard drive that's separate from the computer. Okay, just because it's safer, because you never know what happens if the hosting service has a glitch. No, I'm not familiar with Flywheel. I'm sorry. Okay, just like domain names, is there 24/7 support, and make sure you can get people on the phone. Okay, is there site assistance to transfer away? So, for example, and yes, Michael, it's a good idea to have multiple backups. Absolutely. Okay. So, SiteGround, for example, if you were using HostGator, for example, for hosting your website, again, you're basically renting the space on the internet, and you want to transfer your site from HostGator to SiteGround. SiteGround is going to give you a plugin that you can install on your website, and it will help transfer everything. It's a pretty seamless way. Most good hosting companies will offer that for free. Okay. Is there access to something called cPanel? I personally think that it's very important if you're using a WordPress site to have your hosting company have cPanel. It means that there's a back way to get into your files. So it means if your site breaks, okay, and you can't get into the WordPress part of it, you can get into the backend files to help fix it. Okay. So does your hosting have shared hosting? Is it dedicated hosting? Some hosting companies, SiteGround, HostGator, Bluehost, many of the other ones will give you a free SSL certificate, so you don't need to pay separately for it. And some of them also offer free email too. So those are some of the important questions to ask when you're evaluating hosting services. Okay. Something else to look at is something called bandwidth. Okay. I'm not going to read all of this. You guys will get the slides after this, but this is important because it means that if you're going to have a really, really busy site, maybe you have an e-commerce site, for example, where you anticipate, it's not going to happen at once. We all love it when people start websites and all of a sudden they're deluged with traffic. It might take a year or so, but it's something to consider, especially with an e-commerce site. It means that if you have 10,000 people going to your site in a month, it's going to exceed your bandwidth, which means it will bring your website offline. Okay. So if your website, for example, anticipates having a lot of traffic to it, this is going to be something that you should look at and make sure that it's included in your hosting. A lot of hosting companies have unlimited or unmetered bandwidth. So it means that if you have 10,000 people come to your website one month and 5,000 people come next month, it's not going to bring your website offline. Okay. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. The other part of this is I had mentioned WordPress and hosting is kind of like renting space on the internet. When you install WordPress, it's going to take up a lot of room. Okay. So you need to make sure that, and this is something that you're going to come across when you're looking at hosting companies, is how much they give you for quota, which means basically how much space you're renting. If you think of it in the home context of it's the difference between renting a 1-bedroom apartment or renting a 10-bedroom house. So the bigger the quota you have, the more room you have. If you have a big website, for example, with a lot of files on it, you're going to need more quota. So you're going to need basically more space online. Okay. I already kind of touched on website backups. Please do this, though. It's very important to do it no matter what web design platform that you use. Many of the other do-it-yourself ones, and I'm just going to address this because this usually comes up when I talk about this, many of them will do backups for you anyway. Okay. This is an example of HostGator. Not all hosting platforms do this. Many do. I personally like it because if I have a website, for example, and maybe everybody else has a problem and everybody else's websites are down, I can go on their Twitter/X account and they'll say, yes, websites are down. We're anticipating having it back up fairly soon. Most good hosting companies will keep you updated on that, but you need to go to their social media channels to check it out. They won't email you. Okay. Some hosting platforms, for example, will actually give you information. So they'll say, this particular server is down, for example. So if your website's down, it'll say probably coming up in about half an hour. It'll just kind of give you a baseline. One of and I'll just add this in, if you have somebody else helping you with this, and they've set up your hosting for your website, please make sure that you know who's it's being hosted with. Make sure you have that account information and you have that PIN number, because if you just call up and you say to HostGator, for example, hi, my website's offline, And they're not going to give you any information without that. Okay. Even if it's just a friend helping you out with that, you need to know who it's hosted with. If you're using a website designer, find out which hosting company they're using anyway, just so at least you can get an idea of, yes, SiteGround's sites are down. Because if you don't know, how are you going to call your website designer at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning? They're probably not working and they may not answer their emails. Okay. Before you start setting the site up too, and I actually usually start with this, I start out with register your domain name first. And before you even do anything else with any type of website platform, get your information together for your website. Figure out what pages you're going to have, figure out the titles of them, and get your content together, get your photos together. And the reason I say this is because I've seen this with WordPress, I've seen it with Wix, I've seen it with people using paid website designers, is you get all your information together for your homepage, and then it takes forever or things never get finished. I've been on lots of websites in the last couple of months where I go to the website homepage is finished, it looks good, and I go to the services page and it still says 6 months after the business started, coming soon. Is this something that you want to project as a business? If you get all this information done first, you write the content, you get your images together, you have that. And write your page outline. So just write out the titles, figure out what order you want it in. This is a screenshot, for example, of a score site. So these are the tabs. So if you think of home, about us, find a mentor, workshops, and events, and these indented ones are drop downs. Okay. These are all changeable. The wonderful thing about WordPress is it's very flexible. So if you decide to say, once you set your website up and it says, here's your homepage, here's your About Us page, and you want to flip your services and your About page, you can do that. It's very easy to do. It's basically drag and drop and then save. Okay. But it really, really, please trust me on this, really helps to get ahead of this because, again, I've seen so many businesses get their websites up and they haven't finished it. They haven't really figured out what they want to put in it. Okay. Okay. I always do this when I'm helping with starting a website is I put it in folders. So you write your content and your text up and you put it in a Word document or Google Doc or however you'd like. And then again, get your images together, put them in a folder and just make sure that it's finished. It's the difference between starting your own website on WordPress, for example, and taking 6 months to a year to finish it because you're just plugging away at separate pages, getting all your content together. And once you have your website built, plugging it in and you have a website up and running in a couple of hours. Okay. And we've seen this multiple times with people not getting the content together first. It gets chipped away at slowly. Okay. Now I always like to think of WordPress as the frame of a house. Okay. So think of this, if you're kind of having a difficulty figure out, because I'd mentioned WordPress themes, I'd mentioned WordPress versions, and I'd mentioned plugins. Okay. So WordPress, the basis of it, so the program itself is your base of a house. It's the building. And then a theme or the template is what style it is. So is it a Victorian? Is it a big mansion? Is it a log cabin? Okay. So think of that. You're basically building your frame, which is the WordPress version, and then your themes or your templates are how it's going to look and how it's going to be presented. Okay. Now I always say, if you don't know how you want your site to look first, is do a little bit of digging online. Look at your competition, see what the competition sites are like. What kind of content are they including? What kind of visuals are they using? Is it appealing to you if you were a customer of that business? And then find some other websites that you like. They don't necessarily have to be the same type of business, but find out what colors you think you'd like to use. If you already have a brand kit for your business, obviously use those. But some people don't really have a clear idea of what their website wants to be. They don't have a clear idea of what they want their website to look like, for example. And find some ones that you like and bookmark them. Okay. This one, the top left one, for example, the Cup of Life is a WordPress one. Okay. And this, what I found out, I was looking at the back end and I can talk about how to do that, is this is a theme from Envato Market. So they bought this version for $59. Okay. I want to talk to that briefly. When you buy a theme, sometimes it's a one-time theme, sometimes it's a theme plus. So you're buying the theme plus you're buying a year of support. And there's themes that you can also buy that you have to renew them on a yearly basis. Okay. There's no wrong way to do this, but I found that usually if you find a theme that you like and you're doing more than one website, for example, you're going to actually use the theme over and over again because it's very customizable. Okay. There is a site out there called builtwith.com, and I'll include this again with a follow-up. There's a free version and a paid version. You could only need to use the free version. Say you come across a site that you really, really like, and you can't figure out what platform it's built on. You can put that URL, so widgets.com, in the what built with site, and it will actually tell you. Okay. So this particular site is using the Divi theme, and it's on WordPress. If the site was built in Wix, it would tell you it was a Wix site. If the site was built in Squarespace, for example, it would tell you it was a Squarespace site. This can really help because if you say, I love how that website looks, I want my own personal website to look similar, you can at least get a little ahead of the game and tell what theme you want to use and what theme you might want to buy for it. Okay. You also can look at the coding in the back end. Using built with is actually a lot easier to do. If on this site, for example, I wanted to figure out what kind of website it's built with, I could right click anywhere on the white space and I could actually look at the code. In different browsers, it will actually say in one of the drop downs, view code or view source, it will say. And here I can see in the code, it says themes, which means it's WordPress, and I can see it's built with a Divi child theme. So it means that someone took the Divi theme and they customized it a bit. Usually you need a coder for that. Okay. That's way beyond my skill set, just so you know. Okay. So a good place to start looking to, if you don't find any websites that you really like, is go to the WordPress.org site and click on themes. And it will give you a lot of the popular themes that are out there. There's free ones, there's paid ones. There are other marketplaces out there like Envato Market. There's another one called Theme Forest, for example, that will give you a good selection of themes that you can go and you can buy and look at. Okay. When you're looking at themes, it's important to look at the reviews though. So if you go back here and I clicked on Astra, for example, it's going to say it's been reviewed 50 times. It has 100,000 downloads. It's got support on it, or people have had a lot of complaints. When you're looking at themes, especially ones to buy, please make sure you look at the reviews on it. Okay. That's important. And make sure it's been tested with your most current WordPress version. Okay. There are themes out there that are not current. So for example, if you have a theme, for example, that's not tested with a current WordPress version and you install it, it means that it may not function as new WordPress versions come out. This is really important if you spend a lot of time customizing this or you've bought it. You just need to make sure that it's as updated as possible. And Michael, I don't know what are some of the themes about Astra that makes it popular. I think I've used it myself. It's a fairly user-friendly theme more than anything else. There are so many bells and whistles, and WordPress themes can get really, really complicated. So if you're just kind of starting out with this, before you publish anything online, before you really get your website and start putting it out there, you might want to kind of experiment a little bit with the different themes. I can't say you can't break it, but when you start to install a theme and then you go and change the theme before you put a lot of content in it, it'll just give you an idea of how it's going to look. Get comfortable with them. WordPress is not for everybody, honestly. When I first started being forced to use it, I was not a fan. I do like it now, but that's after 10 years of having to work with it. Hubert asked, what are the themes optimized for search engine optimization? Okay, so most WordPress themes are fairly optimized for search engine optimization. The very, very popular ones that are out there, the ones that have had, hundreds of thousands of downloads, those ones are usually quite well optimized. You do generally need to add an additional search engine optimization plugin, though, to most themes. And yes, Elementor is that's a good question. Elementor is technically a theme and a block builder. Elementor by itself, like if you go to the Elementor website, it'll kind of give you some templates that you can use for Elementor. So it's got more than one theme in it. I hope that made sense. Okay. You can also upload themes or add themes from the back end. So once you have your WordPress installed, you can go in and you can kind of search through these and say, okay, that looks kind of interesting. This looks kind of interesting. And it'll give you a preview and then you can install it. And then it's pretty easy to actually uninstall it. I'll go through all of this when we go to the live version, but there are a lot of different ways to make your website look nice without a lot of back end work on your part. Michael says, yes, you could, as far as I know, you can use Astra and Elementor as a theme. Elementor has two different parts. There's an Elementor plugin, and then there's an Elementor that you have to pay on a yearly basis for. One of them is basically the block builder. So you integrate it into another theme. I know that sounds a little complicated, but it's not. But yes, you can use Elementor with other themes too. Okay. I had mentioned one like Envato Market. Do some research into what you want, and think about how you want your website laid out. I always say before you build a website in itself, think about what you want incorporated in it. Do you want a slideshow? Do you want to insert videos in it? Do you want to put a contact form in it? What other kind of bells and whistles do you want incorporated into that? Because before you settle on a theme permanently, think about which one you want and what features you want in it. Because a lot of these themes that you're going to buy, think of this like from the perspective of a car, for example. So you could buy a car that automatically has, a sunroof for it, that's integrated into the car itself, or you could go to a car place and have a sunroof installed. The downsides of having that is it might leak after the fact. So if you know for sure that you want some things integrated into your website right off the bat, you can look for themes that already have those integrated into them. I could probably spend about 4 hours just talking specifically about themes because there's thousands of them out there. Okay. The one thing to keep in mind is when you're looking at themes is it's not always what you see is what you get. So this is an example of a theme called Panoramic, which I actually happen to like. It's not super expensive. It's pretty easy to use. I think it was about $35. And when you install it onto your WordPress site, it's actually going to look pretty much just like the preview. Okay. This is important, especially if you're going to buy themes, is because you might see a preview of a theme, and when you install it on your WordPress version, it's going to look like this. And you're going to go, wait a second, this isn't anything like I looked at. And a lot of people, unfortunately, get a little frustrated at this point. The good thing is if you buy a WordPress theme through one of the big WordPress markets, they'll give, as long as you go back to them and say, yikes, I made a mistake. I've never had anybody run into an issue having that returned and getting reimbursed for the payment for it. Just make sure when you research these themes that it's easy to use. If you don't have a lot of experience in website design or using WordPress and using themes yourself, which I suspect a lot of people don't have, is make sure that in those reviews, it'll say plug and play. The theme preview looks like what we got when we installed it, because you might come across this beautiful theme that when you look on the reviews say, I installed this theme and I don't know what to do. Those are the ones that are some red flags. You might want to stay away from those because again, they're not plug and play. You install this and what you see is not what you get. Okay. Generally speaking, would you say there's certain advantage to paying for the paid versions versus using free from search engine optimization, time savings, user perspective, or other perspectives? That's a tough question, Michael, because there's a lot of really good free themes out there. If you're just starting out and you basically need a simple, it's a great question. You need a basic website. There are a lot of great free themes out there that will do everything that you need without having to go free or without having to go paid. From a search engine optimization aspect, no, using 2012, which is one of the standard WordPress themes, isn't really going to be any worse off from a search engine optimization perspective than spending, $150 for a theme, which is really on the high end of that. Okay. You also have builders. So Astra, for example, that you asked about earlier, is a theme. You can use website builders that are one-time fees or yearly fees, and those will help customize those more. So for example, I use one called Divi, for example, that I paid a one-time lifetime access for, just so I don't have to pay the $89. I mean, I've been in business now for 20 years. So if you think of $89 times 20 years, that would have added up versus the $249. Okay. The better ones have anything you need, or are they on WordPress themes? Not sure I understand that last question, Michael. Sorry. Rick says, I agree about your site not looking like the demo. Yeah, and I've run into that multiple times myself, where I've said, wow, I found a theme that I really, really like. I've investigated, I've bought the theme, I installed it, and I went, oh, this is above my pay grade. I mean, I'm pretty good at coding, I'm pretty good at figuring out WordPress things. But this is, if it's taking me 4 hours to learn how to edit the homepage, that's kind of an issue. Okay. So yes, so Michael, it depends on what you need. Again, if you're looking for a really basic website like home, about us, products or services, maybe you're not really selling, maybe you have a brick and mortar store, for example, and you're not selling e-commerce and you need a contact form and you need a map on it, that's a pretty basic site. You don't need a site that's going to cost you a lot of money to do those basic things. You can always start out with a theme that you like and customize it, and then in a year decide, yeah, I want to change the look of it. Maybe I'll look for a paid theme, for example. Okay. Which credible providers provide a one-time fee instead of annual fees? So to the best of my knowledge, I know for a fact Divi does, because I use Divi. I believe there's Beaver Builder, there's Elementor. I know Elementor, it's a yearly fee. I don't know about Beaver Builder, but there's a lot of other page builders out there. And my apologies, I don't know, there's a lot of credible ones out there, but I don't know specifically, other than Divi, which is a one-time versus annual. Those are things that you would have to look up yourself. My apologies for not knowing that information, but I'm going to look now. Okay. This is Elementor, for example. This is the, I mentioned having the plugin versus kind of the website itself, $49 versus $89 a year. So those are monthly recurring. Okay, so Rick says, so yes, the content is stored in the database. The one thing that I would mention is, if you are going to change themes, just keep in mind, and this is kind of where the backups come in, make sure you have a current backup of your website, because I've seen people change website themes and it deletes some content, it moves content. Sometimes the content is not compatible with a current theme. So if you're going to change your theme, I always do the preview first to make sure that it's not going to change anything integral in that. There's also something called a sandbox that you can try things out with to make sure that you're not messing up your current site. But I always make sure that you have a current download of your current website with the current theme that you're using, because what happens if you buy a new theme, you like the look of it, sure, you can edit it, and you change your website over and all of a sudden your website breaks. That can happen. Okay. And yes, changing themes is not difficult at all, especially in the first few months. But the more content that you add, the more plugins that you add into it, and the more additional bells and whistles you add on, sometimes those things can conflict with each other. Okay. Now, when you have a theme installed, it's always going to give you an additional dashboard. Okay. This is an example of a custom designed dashboard for a custom written theme that a friend of mine did for the Hudson Valley Lodging ages ago. Okay. So it gives you some bells and whistles. Some themes give you more than others. Okay. Some won't let you change much. Some might only let you change the text or the font or the colors. Some of them let you change everything. Okay. That's important when you're assessing which theme to use. And it'll actually tell you, it'll say flexible layout. It'll tell you mobile friendly, extremely important. It will say you can edit the font. It'll say you can edit the header colors and the footer colors. The more options that it gives you, especially if you're going to buy something, try to go with the more options. Okay. The less options don't give you as much customization. If you don't need that at first, that's fine, but try to look for a little bit more that you need as options rather than less. Okay. Elementor or other page builders, yes, some of them really can screw up layout. The one thing that I've always said is when you look at themes and when you install a theme on your website, just make sure it looks good on a desktop, on a laptop, and also look at it on a mobile phone. I've seen a lot of, and this actually speaks to Rick's comment about Elementor, where the website looks absolutely phenomenal on a desktop, but when you look on a mobile phone, there's a huge space in between where the header is on the mobile phone, and then there's a big white space, and then the text starts way under it. There are ways to fix that, but unless you actually look at your website on all different formats, you may not be aware of that. So it's important to test them on as many functions and as many platforms as you can. Okay. Now I mentioned you have multiple things that you can edit. So for example, I'm not pushing Divi. I just happen to like Divi because it gives you a lot of options for customization. Okay. But these are kind of some examples of all of the different things that you can do with a lot of the page builders. Elementor gives you those options as well in a slightly different format. Okay. But it's going to talk about the colors. It'll talk about layout. It'll talk about menus. If you install a theme and it's got, and I'll go back here, and it only gives you this, but it doesn't give you some additional options, this is an example of a theme that does not allow you to customize it much. If you see things like this, it means that it gives you a lot of customization options. Okay. One of the things you can also do if you're using Google Chrome and maybe you don't have a website near you or a Kindle or a laptop or a tablet, there is a function in Chrome. If you click on the three little dots up near the top and you click down, there's a setting called Developer Tools. If you click on that, you're going to give you some options where you can actually look at your website in different formats. You could see what it looks like on an iPad, for example. You could see what it looks like on a laptop or a Galaxy phone, for example. That will actually help you fine tune some things. Okay. Now, every single theme that I have installed and worked with gives you lots and lots of different options. I think we could probably spend several hours talking about all of these, but these are an example from 5 different websites. The outside of it looks very, very similar in terms of layout, but it's going to give you a lot of different options on the left. So the more things you add to your website, this is the back end of WordPress, the more things that you're going to have as options. Okay. Now, I want to talk about plugins for a minute. So if you think of WordPress as your layout for the website, and then you think of your theme as what the house, so what your website's going to look at, plugins are add-ons. So are you using gas heat? Are you using electric heat? Are you using a mini split? Those plugins are your additional bells and whistles. So I mentioned, for example, some themes include a contact form. Many themes don't. If you want to put a contact form in your website and your theme doesn't include it, you need to add it as a plugin. Okay, so there's no wrong way to do this. So just think of it as the basis. There are additional bells and whistles. If you're a car person, for example, and you're not house person, for example, is it the difference between, a Bose sound system stereo or regular stereo, for example? These are just things to give you more functionality for your website. Okay. The best place to search for plugins is, again, wordpress.org. Go to plugins. And then you can search for plugins. So if you wanted to put a calendar on your page, for example, this is where you would just put in calendar, or you'd put in slideshow, or you'd put in contact form. Okay. When you're investigating plugins, if you ever see this, no stars, no installations, or only 200 plus active installations, please stay away from those. These are not proven. And if you add them to your website, A, they may not work, and two, they might cause some conflicts with everything. Okay. I always look for ones that have a lot of active installations. They're tested with the latest versions of WordPress, and they have a lot of good reviews. Okay. So if you were going to look for a slideshow, for example, and you put slideshow in here, it's going to give you all of the plugins available. Just like themes, there's free ones and then there's paid ones. Okay. Most of the free ones that are out there, unless you really want something super, crazy and want like a really high-end slideshow with multiple pictures in here, most of the time you can use free plugins and get them to do what you want. If you're doing forms, for example, most of the free form builders are going to work just fine. If you want more bells and whistles, you generally need to go for the paid version of those. Okay. I always make sure it's been tested with the latest version of WordPress. This is really, really important. Okay. I always look at the reviews. I also look at the support, and I look at when was the last time it's updated. Okay. Active installations, you want to have a plugin that you're putting on your website that has at least 1 million installations. If it doesn't have that, I would look for something else. Okay. I look at the ratings that are in it too. So this is, for example, this is their support. One of the things I always look for before I install any plugin on a website, I look at, hey, somebody had a problem. Did the developer reply? Because if they didn't, run away. This is not something that you want to put in your website. Okay. It's something that can cause conflicts. It could something that could bring your website down. And there is honestly a more likelihood of your website getting hacked. Okay. WordPress websites have security issues, and generally when a WordPress site gets hacked, it's generally through a backend and it's generally through an insecure plugin. So you want to make sure that, again, it has great reviews, has a lot of good installations, it has support from the developers, and you want to make sure that it's something, because again, you're attaching this to your business. So you want to make sure it's secure. Okay. When you're looking at resolutions, when you're looking at those reviews, you're looking at the support, the best plugins that I found that you want to use on your website are ones that are resolved, where they have the developer, the people that kind of wrote the plugin, wrote the code for this, they're the ones that are responding to this in a very, very quick manner. Those are the good ones that are out there. It's just like anything. If you're looking at a business and somebody calls you right back for customer service, that's generally a good business to use. Think of it in this regard too. Okay. This is what the back end of WordPress is going to look like. And I'll show you this I think actually in the next version of this, we're going to be going into the live version. But these are plugins. This is really what can happen to bring a website offline though. You're going to have a couple of options in here. If you can see up here, it says auto updates disabled. Some people, and this is a preference, I have found that I prefer to go in every couple of weeks and manually update my plugins one by one. The reason that I do this is that if there's a conflict, for example, if maybe it's not compatible with anything else that I updated and it breaks my website, I can actually go into my hosting. I can go into cPanel that I referenced earlier, and I can delete that plugin, or I can uninstall it, and it'll restore my website from scratch. If you have auto updates enabled, I have found that what happens is anytime there's a new update that comes out, it'll just automatically update it. And you could have that enabled, and you could go on your website the next day and find the website's offline, and you don't know which plugin caused that. Okay. And you said, do some plugins can access your files or steal your information? Sometimes they lock you out of your site. Yes, if you have insecure plugins, if you have plugins that have been tested, yes, they can access your files. They're not directly stealing your information, but they're kind of indirectly stealing your information because they're allowing a backdoor to that. There's a great, and this is on the reference sheet, there's a great site out there called WordFence. And there's a free version and a paid version. I personally prefer the paid version, but the free version will at least let you know if there are updates that if there's updates that are needed. It'll tell you if some of your plugins are insecure. And it will also tell you if somebody's trying to access your website, which is very, very helpful. So for example, if you have a compromised plugin and somebody's trying to get into your website that's not you, WordFence will send you an email saying, hey, there's an issue, you better go address this. Okay. And Michael says, how do you know if compatibility issues have arisen? Basically, it means that if I say, okay, so here, I don't have any ones that need to be updated, but say I said it says update this, and I hit update, and all of a sudden my screen goes blank and it says 404 not found, or there's an issue. It'll give you a line of text at the top. There's a problem with that. It'll usually, if there's a problem, it'll tell you right away, and you'll usually get locked out of editing the back end of this. Okay. And yes, so when I do websites, when I do updates one by one, I'll just hit update. I'll let it install, which only usually takes a couple of seconds, and then I'll go on to the next one. Okay. WordFence is the one that I recommend. Subscribe to their newsletter too. They have a great free newsletter. It doesn't come out that often, so it won't fill up your email box, but it will give you updates, and it's a good thing to stay updated on this because it'll say, things like, hey, these themes have a security problem, or these well-known plugins, for example, have an issue or it's gotten hacked. So it'll keep you up to date on any security that you need to know for the site itself. Okay. You can also add plugins directly from the directory. You could go to wordpress.org, or you could add new. So here's an example of, for example, if I had Elementor as a plugin installed, it'll say update now. Okay. Sometimes you might see, if you've installed a plugin, it will say this version is not compatible with your current theme or your current WordPress version. Please make sure you research this. If you get that notification before you hit update now, your site is more likely to go offline and get locked out of that if you see that note. Okay. Okay, there's a couple of different editors that you can use in the back end. This is the newer one. This is called the Gutenberg editor. It's fairly simplified. Basically, you can just type in this, or you can cut and paste, and it's going to give you some additional options. So think of a very, very scaled down version of Microsoft Word. That's what the Gutenberg editor is. Okay. Some people, if they've used WordPress before, don't like this editor. There's no yes or no. You don't have to use one verse over the other one. The older version of WordPress is something called the classic editor. And if you prefer to use this editing format, see, it's a little bit different format. You've got more options in this. You can install this classic editor as a free plugin. Okay. I personally, again, this is a personal perspective, prefer the classic editor only because when I first started using WordPress, that's all I used for 8 years or so before Gutenberg came out. Okay. So, did I mention if a WordPress account are free? So yes, I mean, WordPress itself is free. When you have a hosting service, most WordPress is included in that. So for example, if you're using HostGator, when you're in the back end, it's going to say, would you like to install WordPress on your website? And it'll walk you through all of the steps of doing that. Some hosting services already have WordPress versions pre-installed. There's no guess one is better than the other one, but WordPress itself is free. It's the themes that are free and paid. It's the plugins that are free and paid. But WordPress itself is free. Okay, and WordFence was the site that I recommended that you subscribe to their newsletter. Okay, so again, here's the classic editor. If you have a blog, for example, you might want to have this particular Kismet spam protection installed. It just cuts down on the amount of spam comments that you might have. There's a lot of different bells and whistles to this. Again, you can go limited or you can go hundreds of them in there. The one thing that I found is the more plugins that you install, don't install them if you don't use them, or if your website doesn't really need them. The sites that I have looked at the backends of the ones that are having problems are the ones with like 50 plugins. Most small business sites, you really need less than 10. If you really want to streamline it, 5 to 7 is a good amount. Just use what you need. If you need a contact form, put the contact form in. If you need additional security, put the security one in. But if you're going to say put a widget in because it says it does this and you're not actually going to use that in the site, I wouldn't bother with that. Okay. Some questions are, if one has a website with a domain and a host connected over a year ago with a coming soon page, but it's been dormant, SiteGround Security Optimizer was the only thing protecting the website. When installing WordPress now, find everything malevolent that got into the site while dormant. It should. I would say not the free version of WordFence, but the paid version of WordFence should scan through your site and fix anything. If it's been dormant, honestly, for a while, I kind of doubt anything's in there. SiteGround security is pretty good that I found. Um, there's a comment between buying the domain, the hosting plugins and themes. No, building a website is generally not cheap. You can have a decent WordPress site for, I would say, if you give a cost estimate, if you're not going to have a recurring cost for maybe a couple $100 a year. It can go up in price for that. It's really a question of, I had mentioned WordPress is not for everybody, and it's definitely not to talk people out of using it. But I always say, if you're not sure what to use for your website, do what WordPress.com. You can sign up for a free like WordPress site without having to install anything, without having to pay for a domain name, and see whether you like the interface first. Also sign up for some of the other website builders. Sign up for Wix, sign up for Squarespace, sign up for Weebly. All of those three, with the exception of Squarespace, will give you an unlimited free trial period. Squarespace gives you, I think it's a 2-week free trial period. I always recommend, try all of them and see the one you're most comfortable with. WordPress, by far, I would say, is probably the best for search engine optimization. But Wix and Squarespace do a really, really good job if you follow good search engine optimization kind of rules. And if you take a good WordPress site and you take a good Wix site and you compare them side by side, as long as the Wix site work has been done, they're pretty comparable, because it's not just the website. Search engine optimization has two different parts. It's the website itself and it's off page. So you could have a most perfectly optimized WordPress website, but if you haven't done the off page search engine optimization, it's not going to help you. If you don't have a Google My Business listing, a Bing for Business listing, a Yelp listing, for example, your website listed on other directories, it's not going to help traffic on that. So you could spend a ton of money getting that website itself optimized, but you still need to do the offline work too. Okay. Again, and I wanted to give you an example of, this is what the back end of one of the website builders looks like. So again, this is not the theme. This is a plugin that you're adding to help, customize the website a little bit more. This is what Elementor looks like. So it's kind of a block editor where you can drag and drop things. This is an example of what the Divi builder looks like. You can do the same thing. It just looks a little bit different. Okay. There's also something in the handout. There's something called a sandbox. So the sandbox is something that you can test your different versions of WordPress on. You can test themes on it, and you can make sure that you like it. But again, if you're not sure and absolutely positive you want to get into WordPress, maybe it's too much work, maybe you not like the format of it, try the free version of WordPress out first. Try WordPress.com out. Play around with it a little bit, and then you can just delete your account, or you can transfer any work that you've done into a WordPress.org one. Okay. Just keep in mind, this is your website. This is your business. You want to make sure that you're comfortable using it, because hopefully you're going to be in there adding information. You're going to be updating it. I've just found, if people start sort of do-it-yourself websites, even WordPress is a do-it-yourself website, and they don't feel comfortable with the interface and they don't feel comfortable with using the format, they're not going to touch it. They're not going to update it. They're not going to be in there tweaking it a lot. So once you get in here and you start using it, it will get easier. In the handout, there's a couple of sites that I'm referencing that will walk you through how to actually use this yourself step by step. I can show you how to set up a WordPress site, and we'll go through this a little bit more in the next few sessions. But I hope that you go in yourself. And I found the best way to learn WordPress, and this is how I learned it, is go into these WordPress lessons, bring up WordPress on a website yourself, watch a little bit of the lesson, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then go do it. So it says, if you create a new page, this is how you create a new page. Stop the video or stop the lesson that you're doing, go over to WordPress and create the page, because you're going to start, as you do it yourself, you're going to remember it. What I found is somebody watches a whole lesson for an hour on how to, customize a WordPress site, and then they go to the WordPress version. They're not going to remember, 10 or 20% of it. Okay. The one thing that I can also say is, if you do install WordPress, you set up a domain name, you set up hosting, there are some websites out there, or there's some plugins out there that you can install a coming soon page on. So the one that I use, for example, is called Site Prod, Prod, free version, paid version. For the coming soon page, you just need the free version, which means that you can work on and customize your whole site, but it's not public yet. If somebody goes to URL, widgets.com, they're just going to see a blank page that says coming soon, and you can't access the rest of it unless you're actually logged into the back. Okay. So I know that there was a lot. If I made some things too complicated, please tell me, and I'd be happy to try to explain them a little bit more. Hopefully, when we go to the live versions, there'll be a bit more of a connect between what exactly I'm talking about and what I'm talking about. Okay. And yes, I know it's a lot of information. The important things to remember is, realistically, hosting and domain names, just make sure 24/7 access is the most important part. Okay. Make sure you check reviews. Make sure that you check on whether this is legitimate things, and just check everything. I know I'm sounding like a broken record at this point, but the best way to protect yourself, protect your business, and protect your website is just spend a few minutes in Google and just look at what other people have said out there. Same thing with themes. If it sounds like it's too hard to use, it probably is. If it says it's too complicated, and a lot of other people have said that, it probably is too complicated to use. Okay. And yes, the WordPress link is out of date. Oh, and thank you. This is an older slide deck. So Michael says, is this process correct? Once WordPress is installed, it's using the cloud space of the hosting plan one pays for. Yes, that is correct. You don't need to install a theme to actually have WordPress installed. It will always give you a base theme. I think it's 2010 is the original one. And then you can change them and tweak them as you go through. We will go through this so you can see all this live. So some of the things that I touched on today will make more of a connection to that. Okay. How do we get in there to start doing it instead of just learning it on videos again? Dan, do you understand what that question means?
I think she's looking for some hands-on
Oh,
instead of slides, which you're going
okay.
next week, I believe.
Yes, we'll be going through that next week, where we'll be going into different WordPress sites, and then I'll go back into plugins. I'll go back into some of the things that I touched on the first time, so you can see it live. I tend to get a little leery of starting to do too much live, especially in the beginning, because if you have internet issues, sometimes you're just waiting and the wheel is spinning or the sites are down. Okay. Hopefully the handout that gets sent out should be helpful too, as a good place to start. Okay. And again, if there's anything that I talked about that you need more information about, or you need to explain it better, I'm certainly happy to try. Michael says, all the text and images are ultimately being tweaked on the hosting site. So when you change text and images, you're changing them in WordPress, but those files are actually sitting on your hosting service. So it's not being tweaked. So Astra is a theme, it's not the basis. It's kind of like the skin, it's, you know, the color of your car, the brick facing of your house is the theme. I hope that answered your question, Michael. Okay.
All
Does
right.
any
Yeah, if you have any more questions while I wrap this up, please continue putting them in the chat, and Heather is still going to be here and answering them. But
Okay.
before we log off, I just want to reiterate, if you have been inspired by Heather and would like perhaps more information from her, I put her email address. Of course, I didn't ask her. I just put her email address in the chat, heather.turner@scorevolunteer.org. If you'd like to, you will be getting an email from our national chapter. It is complete with a survey. If you could take a moment to fill in that survey, that would be really helpful. For two things, we want to let Heather know how wonderful her presentation was, but from my vantage point as the education chair for our chapter, I'm interested in what other topics you're interested in. Keep in mind that this is part one of a 3-part series. If you have not signed up for the others in the series, there will be links in the email that you'll be getting. In the email that you're going to be getting in the next couple of days, you'll have a link to this recording. You'll have a copy of all of Heather's slides, and you'll have a copy of the handout that she has referred to a few times. My email address, sure. It's actually same pattern, diane.mckeever@scorevolunteer.org, if you'd like to contact me. So a couple of questions have come in, Heather. Like to address some?
Yes. So here, so one of the questions that was had was, how do you find the theme? So I'm going to just, can you stop screen sharing for a second?
Sure.
Okay. Okay. Let's see, basic. Just make sure that I'm sharing the right screen. Okay, can you see built with, Dan?
I see a pie chart.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So I'm going to use Kind Bars. Kind Bars, I know that for a fact this is not a WordPress site, but I wanted to show people the couple different ways. If I right click on this and I go to view page source, this is on a PC. If you're on a Macintosh, you can go into the top bar and go view page source. This is going to give me the code that this is written in, which to most people is a lot of gobbledygook. If this was written in WordPress, or if this is a WordPress theme, when you scroll down though, you can actually see, like if you go Control F and you type in theme, it would actually bring you down to where it would say theme, and it would say Divi or Astra or one of the many other ones that are there. Or you can go to Built with Technologies and you can put the website address in. I just deleted that, so force a habit. You don't have to. I just go look up. This is going to tell you, for example, a lot of information about the website. So, for example, of interest to me would be the fact that they have Google Analytics, which doesn't surprise me. They've got Google conversion tracking. They've got Bing tracking. They've got all this other stuff, which most websites don't have. But if you wanted to see which theme they were using, you would scroll way, way down to where it would say usually frameworks, and it would tell you which WordPress theme it was being used. Okay. So if this was Astra, for example, it would tell you Astra WordPress. Okay. And let me actually, I wanted to show you, since we've got a couple minutes, Internet Archive. This is really, I'd mentioned this is really, really useful to see if you have a domain name. It's called the Wayback Machine. That's one of my favorite sites. This is really helpful if you're researching competition too. which if you like, say you've had a competitor that's been in business for 10 years, for example, and you wanted to see what their pricing was like 10 years ago or 5 years ago, you could actually go back and see what their website looks like 5 years ago if it's got a screenshot of it. So for example, I can go back to 2018 and I could see, hopefully my internet is working for me, and you could see what this is like. This is what their website looked like way back then. Not too different, but to me, I find it very, very fascinating. And if you're doing your own website, I like to do this and see what's changed. So like if you went back to my own website, I think I redo my website completely every couple of years to go back and do and see what it looked like when I had it 15 years ago and see how much it's changed over time. Okay. Let's see some other questions. Astra Elementor. Oh, my website's a mess. I'm sorry, your website's a mess, Chris. But cPanel is like the utility closet. That is, I'm gonna steal that, Rick. That is an awesome way to put that. Yes, cPanel gives you everything. I mean, it gives you access to your email from the back end. It gives you access to internal statistics, into installing things, into access into all of your files in the back end. It's very, very helpful if you're going to use WordPress to have access to that information. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Did I miss any? I don't think so. And Chris, if you'd like to connect by email, I can't promise that I can help, but I'd be happy to kind of look at it and see if I have any suggestions. And Kathy, you had a question. Would you like to put it into chat, or would you like us to unmute you? Okay. No, okay. All right. Anybody else have any other questions? What website is where the building of the website takes place? So yes, so when you have hosting, so again, hosting is like renting the space on the internet. When you install WordPress, you are inputting information into WordPress itself. cPanel is just basically storing the files, but you're actually going to be editing it in WordPress. So you're going to be adding your text in WordPress, you're going to be adding your images in WordPress, but those are accessible in cPanel, but you're not going to be doing the editing in cPanel. You're going to be doing the editing in WordPress itself when you're logged in. And I'll show you guys that next week. Okay.
So this is part one of 3 parts, one very informative, huge part of 3 parts. Heather has laid the groundwork. And so next week, if you've signed up, you'll be able to join us and continue your odyssey. But next week will be much more of Heather doing hands-on within WordPress rather than the concepts behind it, because she's certainly done that in detail. So if you haven't signed up, consider going to our website, scored.org/Minnesota, and signing up for parts 2 and 3. As I said, you'll be getting links to that in the email that you'll be getting. I want to thank you all for attending. I think you found that this was probably one of the more valuable hour and a halves of your life. I want to thank Heather for sharing her incredible knowledge with us. And I really look forward to moving on with this next week. Anything else that we need to cover, Heather? Any other questions that are burning and need answer?
No, I think hopefully I answered the couple that people had. So basically, if you have okay, so and it might help if I verbalize this. So if your hosting company is GoDaddy or Bluehost or SiteGround, you're not going to log into those companies to edit your website. You're going to go into widget.com/WP-admin. So you're going to be editing the website directly into WordPress. You're not going to be logging into the hosting company. Okay, I hope that helps clarify that a little bit.
Interesting. All right, wonderful.
Okay.
Well, thank you again for coming. Thank you again, Heather, for sharing your knowledge. And I hope to see every one of you here next week.
Okay.
Bye, all. Have a
All
good
right.
week.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. Great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.